Welcome to Nothing is Rushing. Tonight we step into medieval Europe, where romance was rarely simple, and flirting often had to hide in plain sight. A glance across a churchyard, a song beneath a window, a ribbon given at the right moment, or a few careful words at market could mean more than they seemed. Love moved through families, gossip, religion, class, reputation, and the daily routines of village, city, and courtly life. This is a quiet look at how medieval people noticed one another, admired one another, misunderstood one another, and sometimes risked embarrassment for the chance to be remembered. Before we begin, just a small reminder. If you would like to find this place again, subscribing and leaving a small like is enough. But if you do nothing right now, that is perfectly fine too. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. I always love seeing listeners joining from all around the world. Now settle in, lower the lights, and let us slowly drift into tonight's journey. In the Middle Ages, flirting rarely looked like open, easy conversation between two people free to choose each other without consequence. It lived inside a world of rules, watched by family expectations, church teachings, village gossip, social rank, money, land, and the careful eyes of neighbours, who always seemed to appear at exactly the wrong moment. A smile could be noticed, a repeated glance could become a story. Even standing too long near someone's doorway might give a curious household enough material for several evenings of whispering. And yet people still found ways to show interest. They noticed one another at church, in markets, beside wells, during harvest work, at weddings, in town streets, and on feast days when ordinary life loosened just a little. Flirting could be quiet, indirect, and almost hidden in plain sight. A softened look, a small favour, a ribbon offered at the right time, a song heard beneath a window, or a conversation that seemed to be about bread, weather, or livestock, while somehow not being entirely about bread, weather, or livestock. For nobles, courtship might be wrapped in poetry, etiquette, music, and political calculation. A compliment could sound elegant, but behind it might stand family strategy, inheritance, alliance, and reputation. For ordinary villagers and townspeople, romance was often more practical, shaped by work, household needs, family approval, and the question of whether two lives could actually be joined. Attraction mattered, of course. People were still people, but affection usually had to move carefully through a world where marriage was never only private. So medieval flirting was not always grand or dramatic. Much of it was made of small signals: who looked back, who lingered, who helped carry water, who saved a place at a feast, who sang a little too loudly near the right window. It was cautious, social, sometimes awkward, sometimes charming, and often deeply human. Beneath the rules and rituals, there was the same old uncertainty. Does this person notice me? Do they understand what I mean? And if they do, what happens next? In a medieval village, noticing someone was rarely a private event. People lived close to one another, worked near one another, prayed beside one another, and met again and again in the same familiar spaces. A young man might see a young woman near the well, at the edge of a field, outside the church door, or carrying something from the market. A young woman might notice who helped with harvest work, who spoke gently to animals, who looked clean on a feast day, or who suddenly became very interested in standing near her family's fence. The village itself created chances for small encounters. There were paths to the mill, lanes between cottages, grazing areas, churchyards, gardens, and doorways where people paused at the end of the day. No one needed to announce romantic interest directly. Simply appearing in the same places often enough could become its own message. Of course, it had to look accidental, because looking too deliberate invited laughter, suspicion, or the terrifying attention of older relatives. A glance across the village could carry more meaning than a long conversation. If someone looked once, it might mean nothing. If they looked again the next day, and then again after Sunday Mass, the meaning began to gather weight. A smile held for a moment too long could be remembered all afternoon. A shy lowering of the eyes could be modesty, encouragement, or simply panic, which has confused people beautifully in every century. So the first stage of medieval flirting often belonged to distance. Before gifts, songs, dances, or promises, there was the quiet act of becoming aware of someone else in a shared world. Two people might still be surrounded by family, neighbours, work and rules, but across a village path or a churchyard, something small could begin. Not loudly, not freely, but carefully enough to survive being watched. In a world where open flirting could be risky, the eyes did much of the early work. A glance could be quick enough to deny, but long enough to remember. Someone might look across a churchyard, a market stall, a feast table, or a village lane, then look away as if nothing had happened. The charm was often in that careful uncertainty, because no one had fully spoken, yet something had still been said. Medieval people lived in communities where reputation mattered, so subtlety had value. A direct stare could seem rude, bold, or suspicious, while a softened look could suggest interest without demanding an answer. A smile might appear only for a moment, then vanish behind lowered eyes, a turned shoulder, or a very serious inspection of a basket of onions. Romance at times had to hide behind excellent vegetable awareness. These signals were not always easy to read. A person might look away from shyness, modesty, disapproval, or because someone's mother was standing nearby with the full authority of a courtroom. This made flirting both delicate and uncertain. The meaning lived between gesture and guesswork, and sometimes two people could spend weeks exchanging signs that neither of them was brave enough to explain. Still, these small looks mattered. They allowed affection to begin quietly, without immediately becoming a public promise. Before letters, songs, dances, or gifts, there was often the simple question of whether someone looked back. In the Middle Ages, a glance could be nothing at all, or the beginning of a story that everyone else would eventually notice. The village well was one of the most ordinary places in medieval life, which made it one of the most useful places for noticing someone without seeming to notice them too much. People came for water every day, carrying buckets, jugs, wooden pails, or clay vessels, and because water was necessary, no one had to invent a dramatic reason to be there. A young person could arrive at just the right time and still claim complete innocence, as if the well, the hour, and the person they hoped to see had all arranged themselves by accident. Around the well, conversation could begin gently. Someone might offer to lift a heavy pail, steady a jug, move aside politely, or ask a simple question about family, work, weather, or the coming feast day. These were not passionate declarations, but they allowed two people to share a few moments under the eyes of the village. The important thing was balance. Too much attention looked bold, too little attention looked cold. A successful exchange had to seem natural, useful, and just slightly warmer than necessary. The well also had its dangers, and not only the danger of dropping the bucket. Other people gathered there too: mothers, sisters, older women, servants, children, neighbours, and anyone with a talent for remembering small details. A smile could be carried from the well to 3 cottages before noon. A repeated meeting could become interesting. A young man helping the same young woman too often might soon discover that the entire village had become a committee. Still, the well remained a quiet stage for early affection. It offered rhythm, repetition, and a socially acceptable reason to meet again. If 2 people were careful, they could build familiarity through small kindnesses, a shared laugh, a brief look, a hand offered at the right moment, a few words spoken while water filled the vessel. In medieval flirting, romance often began not with poetry, but with practical chores made unexpectedly meaningful. Market day gave medieval flirting a little more room to breathe. Unlike the well, the churchyard, or the narrow village lane, the market was already noisy, busy, and full of movement. People came to buy bread, cloth, tools, fish, salt, ribbons, pots, herbs, and whatever else the season allowed. In that crowd, a person could look across a stall, pass someone more than once, or begin a conversation without it seeming too carefully arranged. The market was practical on the surface, but underneath all the bargaining and baskets, it was also one of the great social stages of medieval life. A young man might find a reason to buy something from a stall near the person he hoped to impress, even if he had no urgent need for another handful of apples. A young woman might pause over a piece of cloth while noticing who had also paused nearby. Compliments could hide inside ordinary talk, a comment about a good choice, a fine ribbon, a well-made belt, or a clever bargain. Even paying attention could become a form of courtship, because in a crowded market, choosing to notice one person was already a small declaration. There was also the pleasure of being seen at one's best. People might wear cleaner clothes, brighter colours, a better belt, a fresh veil, polished shoes, or a small ornament saved for public days. Market day allowed people to appear slightly more attractive than they did during ordinary work, without seeming vain. It was still medieval Europe after all. One had to look appealing while maintaining the delicate fiction that one had made no special effort whatsoever. But the market watched as much as it allowed. Parents, neighbours, sellers, servants, friends, and rivals were all present, and gossip could move through stalls as quickly as coins. A conversation that lasted too long might be noticed. A repeated purchase from the same seller could raise eyebrows. Still, that risk was part of the charm. Between baskets of eggs, bolts of cloth, and the smell of fresh bread, people found ways to meet each other's eyes. In the crowded rhythm of market day, flirtation could pass as business, and business could become the excuse for returning next week. Church was one of the few places where nearly everyone might gather in the same space, which made it important for medieval courtship, even if it was not exactly designed for romance. People came to pray, confess, listen, observe holy days, and be seen by the community. A young man might notice who arrived with her family, who wore a clean veil, who stood modestly near the wall, or who lowered her eyes at the right moment. A young woman might notice who behaved respectfully, who sang well enough to be heard without clearly trying to be heard, or who looked unusually serious whenever her family was nearby. But admiration in church had to be careful. This was sacred space, and even outside the service, the churchyard carried a serious social atmosphere. Open flirting could seem disrespectful, and too much staring might be judged harshly by neighbours, elders, or the priest himself. So, interest had to pass through small gestures. A brief glance before the service, a polite greeting after Mass, a pause near the church door, or walking home along the same path without making it too obvious. Medieval flirtation often depended on doing something clearly enough to be understood, but gently enough to be denied. Feast days loosened the rules a little. Religious festivals, saints' days, weddings, seasonal celebrations, and village gatherings brought music, food, processions, games, and a rare sense of shared pleasure. People dressed better, families came together, and the ordinary rhythm of work softened for a while. In this atmosphere, admiration could become warmer, a smile might last longer, a conversation might feel less suspicious. Even standing near someone during a procession could carry a quiet excitement, especially when everyone was pretending to pay attention only to the holy occasion. Still, feast days did not remove the watching eyes of the community. They only made those eyes slightly more forgiving. A young couple might exchange a look across a churchyard, share a few words near a table, or notice each other during dancing later in the day. Nothing needed to be said plainly. In medieval life, devotion, celebration, reputation, and attraction often stood very close together. Sometimes the path toward affection passed through bells, candles, hymns, and crowded feast tables, where the heart had to behave politely while still trying to be noticed. Music gave medieval flirting a voice when ordinary conversation was too dangerous, too watched, or too difficult. A song could travel where a person could not. It could rise from a street, a courtyard, a feast hall, or the space beneath a window, carrying affection in a form that seemed less direct than speech. To sing was not always to confess love openly, but it could suggest admiration with just enough softness to leave room for modest denial. The image of a young man singing beneath a window belongs partly to romance, but it was not invented from nothing. Medieval people knew the power of songs, especially in a world where many stories, jokes, prayers, and memories moved through voices rather than books. A melody could make a feeling public without making it completely plain. If the listener approved, the song became charming. If not, it became noise, and perhaps a small problem for the household trying to sleep. Love songs could praise beauty, loyalty, gentleness, longing, or the pain of being unnoticed. Some were elegant and courtly, filled with noble images of distant ladies and devoted hearts. Others were earthier, playful, teasing, and much closer to village life. A singer might choose his words carefully, hoping they would be understood by the right person and ignored by everyone else, which was optimistic, considering how much medieval neighbours enjoyed understanding things not meant for them. Yet music did something important. It turned private feeling into shared atmosphere. A song at a feast could make two people aware of each other without a single direct sentence between them. A tune by a window could become a risk, a compliment, or a story retold the next morning with unnecessary detail. In medieval flirting, music was never only sound, it was courage made softer, desire made acceptable, and sometimes embarrassment made beautifully audible. Love letters in the Middle Ages belonged mostly to those who could read and write, or to those wealthy enough to find someone who could do it for them. Among nobles, clerics, educated townspeople, and certain merchant families, a written message could carry admiration with a grace that spoken words did not always allow. A letter could be shaped, corrected, folded, sealed, and sent with care. It could praise beauty, virtue, loyalty, or longing, and it could make the writer sound far more composed than they might have looked in person. For many ordinary people, messages were more likely to travel by voice. A friend, servant, sibling, neighbour, or trusted older woman might carry a few careful words from one person to another. This created possibilities, but also hazards. A message could be softened, exaggerated, misunderstood, delayed, or delivered with the subtlety of a dropped bucket. Medieval romance sometimes depended not only on courage, but on choosing a messenger who would not improve the message too creatively. There was also the problem of secrecy. A folded note could be found, a messenger could be questioned, a servant could gossip, a friend could become suddenly unreliable under pressure from an interested aunt. Even among the literate, a love letter was not a private object in the modern sense. It moved through hands, rooms, roads, and households, and each stage offered a chance for discovery. The written word could feel intimate, but it was still travelling through a very public world. Still, letters and messages mattered because they allowed feelings to cross distance. Someone could send a token of affection from another town, ask carefully about a possible meeting, or express admiration in words too delicate for a crowded market or churchyard. Whether written in fine language or whispered through a nervous friend, the message carried the same old hope that it would arrive safely, be understood kindly, and not be read aloud by the wrong person at the worst possible time. In medieval courtship, a gift did not need to be expensive to carry meaning. A flower, a ribbon, a small brooch, a pair of gloves, a bit of embroidery, a carved wooden object, or even a carefully chosen piece of fruit could become more than itself. What mattered was not only the object, but the timing, the giver, and whether anyone else noticed the exchange. A simple token could say, quietly, "I have thought of you," without requiring the kind of open declaration that might bring half the village to attention. Among nobles, gifts could be more elaborate. A lady might give a knight a sleeve, a scarf, a ribbon, or another small item to carry during a tournament or public event. Such a token could suggest favour, admiration, or a connection carefully wrapped in ceremony. In courts and noble households, these gestures often lived between romance, performance, and politics. A gift might flatter the heart, but it could also be watched by families who were thinking less about poetry and more about inheritance. For ordinary people, tokens were usually humbler, but no less important. A young man might offer help with a task, bring something useful from the market, or carve a small object during winter evenings. A young woman might give a thread, a piece of cloth, a small charm, or a sign of approval that did not look too bold. Sometimes a gift was practical enough to avoid scandal, but personal enough to be understood. Medieval flirting often worked best when it could pretend to be innocent. Of course, gifts could be risky. Accepting one might suggest interest, refusing one might cause embarrassment, and accepting too many could create expectations. A ribbon was rarely just a ribbon once people began whispering about it, but that was part of the quiet drama of medieval affection. In a world where words could be dangerous and privacy was limited, small objects became little promises, carried in sleeves, tucked into purses, hidden in chests, or remembered long after the giver had walked away. Dancing gave medieval people a rare chance to be near one another without needing too many excuses. At weddings, feast days, village celebrations, and seasonal gatherings, music could draw people into circles, lines, and shared movement. The rules of modesty did not disappear, but they softened for a while. A person could stand close, follow another's steps, exchange a smile, or feel the small thrill of being chosen for a dance, all under the protection of custom. For young people especially, dancing made attraction visible in a way that still felt socially acceptable. Who looked for whom when the music began? Who seemed pleased to stand nearby? Who stepped carefully to avoid seeming too eager, but not so carefully that the moment vanished? These little choices mattered. In a community where direct speech could be difficult, movement became another language. A turn, a shared rhythm, or a brief touch could carry a meaning that ordinary conversation might not safely hold. The dance floor was not entirely free, of course. Families watched, elders noticed, and friends remembered everything with unhelpful accuracy. A clumsy step could become a joke. A lingering look could become gossip. Someone too bold might be corrected quickly, while someone too shy might spend the evening studying the floorboards with tragic dedication. Medieval dancing was social pleasure, but it was also public theatre, and everyone had at least a small audience. Still, dancing brought warmth into courtship. It allowed people to test comfort, humour, grace, and attention in a shared moment. A good dancer might appear lively and confident. A poor dancer might at least appear sincere, which sometimes did almost as well. In the slow turning of a circle, the passing of hands, and the music rising over candlelight or open air, medieval flirting found one of its gentler forms. Not a promise, not yet, but an invitation to notice and be noticed. Clothing was one of the quiet languages of medieval courtship. People did not always have many garments, especially among ordinary villagers, but what they wore still carried meaning. A cleaner tunic, a brighter hood, a better belt, a carefully pinned veil, or sleeves arranged with unusual care could suggest that someone expected to be seen. On feast days, market days, and weddings, appearance became part of the social game, though no one had to admit they were dressing for anyone in particular. Colours, fabrics, and small ornaments could attract attention in subtle ways. A ribbon at the sleeve, embroidery at the edge of a garment, a polished buckle, or a well-kept pair of shoes might say something about taste, skill status, or effort. Wealthier people had more room for display, using fine cloth, fur, jewels, and fashionable cuts to make admiration easier to notice. For ordinary people, the signs were simpler, but perhaps more revealing, because even a small improvement showed intention. Clothing also helped people read one another. It suggested rank, occupation, family resources, modesty, respectability, and sometimes availability. A young woman's head covering, a young man's belt, the quality of wool, the cleanliness of linen, and the way someone carried themselves all became part of the impression. Medieval flirtation was rarely just about beauty alone. It was also about whether a person seemed orderly, capable, honest, and suitable enough to survive the judgment of families. Still, the heart had a way of noticing details that official society might overlook. A sleeve mended neatly, hair arranged under a veil, a cloak brushed clean before church, or a shy adjustment of a hood could become memorable to the right person. Clothing did not speak loudly, but it spoke constantly. In a world where open declarations were risky, looking just a little more carefully prepared could be a gentle message. I know people will see me today, and perhaps I hope one person sees me most. Hair and grooming mattered in medieval attraction, though not always in ways that match modern ideas of beauty. Cleanliness, order, modesty, health, and social respectability all shaped how someone was seen. A young man might trim his beard, wash his face, smooth his hair, or wear his best hood on a feast day. A young woman might arrange her hair carefully under a veil, braid it neatly, scent her clothing with herbs, or make sure her linen looked fresh enough to suggest both care and good household habits. Loose hair could carry powerful meaning, especially for women, because hair was often tied to youth, beauty, modesty, and marital status. In many settings, covered or controlled hair signaled respectability, while visible hair could feel more intimate or festive depending on place and custom. At weddings, seasonal celebrations, or certain social gatherings, A glimpse of carefully arranged hair might be noticed very quickly. Medieval flirting did not always need boldness. Sometimes it needed one well-timed braid and a room full of people pretending not to notice. Smell also played its part. The medieval world was full of smoke, animals, damp wool, kitchens, streets, and hard work, so smelling pleasant was not taken for granted. Herbs, flowers, clean linen, fresh rushes, or simply the absence of road dust and sweat could make a person more appealing. No one expected modern perfume cloud drama, but a little rosemary, lavender, rosewater, or clean fabric could quietly improve someone's chances of being remembered kindly. Grooming was also a signal of readiness. It suggested that a person cared how they appeared in public, and perhaps cared who might be looking. A polished belt, washed hands, combed hair, fresh veil, trimmed beard, or carefully cleaned shoes could turn an ordinary meeting into something more deliberate. In the Middle Ages, looking attractive was not only about beauty, it was about showing that one was healthy, respectable, capable, and maybe, very quietly, open to being admired. A medieval compliment often had to be more careful than a modern one. Open praise could sound charming, but it could also sound bold, foolish, or suspicious if spoken in the wrong place. A young man did not always walk up and declare someone beautiful without consequences, especially if her family, neighbours, or employer were nearby. Compliments had to move through accepted language, modest admiration, respectful notice, and words that could be defended later as simple politeness. Beauty was praised, of course, but it was not the only thing worth noticing. A person might be admired for grace, modesty, skill, kindness, a pleasant singing voice, fine sewing, good manners, strength at work, or devotion at church. In a practical society, a compliment could carry romance and common sense together. Saying someone had made excellent bread, managed a task well, or chosen cloth wisely might sound ordinary, but with the right tone and timing, it could become something warmer. Among nobles, compliments could become far more elaborate. Poets and courtiers praised bright eyes, fair faces, gentle hearts, loyalty, virtue, and noble bearing with language polished until it shone. Sometimes the praise was sincere, sometimes it was performance, often it was both. Courtly compliments could be beautiful, but they also had rules of their own, and one badly chosen phrase could turn elegance into embarrassment rather quickly. For ordinary people, the best compliments may have been quieter. A few words after church, a careful remark at market, praise for a song at a feast, or a simple "you look well today" could mean more than it seemed. Medieval flirting often lived in these small spaces, where admiration had to be clear enough to warm the heart, but gentle enough not to set the whole village listening. Friends, siblings, servants, neighbours, and older relatives often played a quiet part in medieval flirting. In a world where two people could not always speak freely, affection sometimes needed a messenger. Someone might ask a trusted friend whether a certain person had noticed them, whether they were promised to anyone, whether their family seemed open to a match, or whether that smile after church had meant anything at all. The question was old, even if the clothing was different. Did they ask about me? These go-betweens could be useful because they soften the risk. A direct confession might cause embarrassment, but a careful question passed through another person gave everyone room to retreat. If the answer was encouraging, the courtship could move forward. If it was not, the hopeful person could pretend they had only been curious, which is one of humanity's oldest emergency exits. Medieval romance depended not only on feeling, but on preserving dignity in front of people who would remember everything. Servants and household members could also carry messages in noble or wealthy homes. A maid, page, companion, or attendant might deliver a note, arrange a meeting, or quietly discover what someone thought. But this made romance vulnerable to gossip, loyalty, jealousy, and accident. The more people involved, the more alive the secret became, until it sometimes belonged less to the lovers than to the entire household. Still, these helpers mattered because love rarely moved alone. Courtship existed inside families, workplaces, neighbourhoods, and communities, so other people naturally stepped into the story. Some helped kindly, some interfered, some exaggerated, some probably enjoyed the drama more than was spiritually necessary. But through them, glances became questions, questions became hopes, and hope slowly became something that could be spoken aloud. Among nobles, flirting could become a careful performance, shaped by manners, poetry, music, and the politics of family ambition. A lord's hall or royal court offered more luxury than a village lane, but not necessarily more freedom. Noble men and women were surrounded by servants, relatives, rivals, chaplains, advisors, and people who understood that a glance might carry political meaning. Attraction could be real, but it moved through a world where marriage often meant land, alliance, inheritance, and power. Courtly love gave noble flirtation a language of distance and devotion. A knight might praise a lady's beauty, virtue, mercy, or grace in songs and poems, presenting himself as loyal, humble, and emotionally ruined in a very elegant way. A lady might offer a token, a smile, or a guarded word of favour. Much of this was ritualised, almost like a game of admiration, where desire had to look refined, controlled, and worthy of noble company. Tournaments also created a public stage for flirtation. A knight could ride under a lady's favour, carry a scarf or sleeve, or perform bravery while hoping to be noticed. The gesture looked romantic, but it was also extremely public, which meant it could be admired, judged, mocked, or discussed over supper by people with excellent memories. Nothing says quiet affection quite like several armoured men hitting each other while half the court watches. Yet noble flirting was not only spectacle, it also lived in quieter moments, a shared book, a song in a chamber, a conversation in a garden, a measured compliment at a feast, or a look exchanged across a hall. The feelings could be sincere, even when surrounded by ceremony. In noble society, courtship often wore silk and spoke in polished phrases, but beneath the etiquette was still the same uncertainty found everywhere else, the hope of being seen, chosen, and remembered. For ordinary villagers, flirting was often woven into work. People noticed one another while cutting hay, tending animals, carrying water, grinding grain, gathering firewood, baking, brewing, repairing tools, or walking to the fields at dawn. Romance did not always arrive dressed in poetry. Sometimes it arrived as someone offering to lift the heavier bundle, share a crust of bread, mend a broken handle, or walk beside you at the end of a long day without needing to say very much. Peasant courtship was shaped by closeness and practicality. Families knew one another, neighbours watched one another, and a person's reputation was built from daily habits. Was he hard-working? Was she kind? Did he drink too much? Could she manage a household? Was the family respected? Did they have land, animals, tools, debts, or problems that everyone quietly knew about? Attraction mattered, but marriage also meant labour, survival, children, property, and the joining of families who would still have to live near each other afterward. This did not make peasant flirting cold or unromantic. It simply gave it a practical texture. A young man might try to look strong during harvest, though not so obviously that everyone laughed at him. A young woman might notice who worked steadily, who spoke gently, who avoided foolish quarrels, or who could make others laugh without becoming a nuisance. Small moments carried warmth. Shared jokes in the fields, a glance during a feast, a walk back from church, or a little help given more often than chance required. In this world, affection often grew slowly from familiarity. Two people might know each other for years before courtship became serious, or they might be pushed together by family agreement and discover tenderness later. Medieval village life left little room for fantasy to float too far above the ground. Love had to stand near bread, weather, animals, taxes, and winter fuel. But that did not make it less human. It made it deeply rooted, like something growing carefully in soil that everyone depended on. In medieval towns and cities, flirting had a different rhythm from village courtship. The streets were busier, the crowds more varied, and a person might pass strangers every day without knowing their entire family history by breakfast. Markets, workshops, taverns, church steps, guild gatherings, bridges and narrow lanes all created chances to notice someone. A glance in a city could feel slightly freer because the crowd offered cover, but that freedom was never complete. Urban life had its own watchers. Neighbours leaned from upper windows, apprentices stood in shop doors, servants carried messages between houses, and market sellers remembered who stopped where and for how long. A young woman might notice a craftsman at his bench, a young man might find reasons to pass the same stall, and two people might exchange a few words while buying candles, thread, bread, or ale. The city gave more opportunities, but it also gave gossip more roads to travel. Workplaces could become quiet stages for attraction. A tailor's shop, bakery, brewery, goldsmith's bench, or cloth market placed people in repeated contact, where admiration could grow through skill as much as beauty. Someone who worked neatly, spoke kindly to customers, or handled business with confidence could become attractive in a practical, steady way. In the city, charm was not only in a smile. It could be in competence, patience, and the ability to survive a crowded street without losing one's temper. Still, urban flirtation carried risk. A rumour in a town could move through streets almost as quickly as smoke, and reputation mattered for work, marriage, and family honour. Yet people found ways to be careful. A polite greeting, a repeated errand, a borrowed tool returned slowly, a conversation at a shop counter that lasted just long enough to be interesting. In medieval cities, romance often lived between commerce and community, hidden among bells, bargaining, footsteps, and the endless movement of ordinary life. Festivals gave medieval flirting a brighter atmosphere than ordinary days allowed. During May games, saints' days, weddings, seasonal fairs, and local celebrations, work loosened its grip for a while, and people gathered for music, food, dancing, processions, games, and laughter. The same village or town that usually watched every gesture with sharp seriousness could become a little more forgiving when bells rang, tables filled, and the air carried the feeling of a shared holiday. Springtime celebrations were especially linked with youth, greenery, and courtship. Young people might gather flowers, decorate doorways, walk in groups, dance outdoors, or join games that brought them closer than daily routine usually permitted. A garland, a song, a playful challenge, or a chosen dance partner could say what plain speech could not. The mood was lighter, but the signal still mattered. Being noticed during a festival could linger in memory long after the music ended. There was also room for mischief, though not without limits. Someone might tease, sing a bold song, compete in a game, or make a joke that sounded innocent enough, while clearly aiming at one person. Friends helped, laughed, interrupted, and occasionally made everything worse with the confidence only friends possess. A festival could turn shy attraction into public possibility, because joy gave people permission to be a little braver. Still, when the celebration ended, ordinary rules returned. Families remembered who danced together, neighbours recalled who walked home slowly, and older women often had a gift for reconstructing entire romances from 3 glances and half a smile. Yet that was part of the charm. Festivals did not erase medieval caution, but they softened it. For a few bright hours, flirtation could step into the open air, wearing flowers, music, and the excuse of celebration. Reputation was one of the strongest forces around medieval courtship. A flirtatious glance might feel private to the 2 people involved, but the world around them often disagreed. Family honour, religious expectation, household discipline, and neighbourhood gossip all shaped what could be said, where 2 people could meet, and how much freedom they had before others began to interfere. Attraction might begin in the heart, but it quickly found itself surrounded by witnesses. For women especially, reputation could be fragile and heavily guarded. Too much openness might be judged as immodest, while too much coldness could discourage a serious suitor. Men also risked embarrassment, rejection, family anger, or accusations of dishonourable behaviour. A careless rumour could damage marriage prospects, friendships, employment, or standing in the parish. In such a world, flirtation had to move with care, like someone carrying a candle through a crowded room. This is why so much medieval flirting became indirect. People used glances, songs, tokens, friends, feast day conversations, and public settings where everything could appear respectable. A meeting in the open was safer than a secret one, but too much public warmth created its own danger. The balance was delicate. 2 people might want to be noticed by each other, while very much not wanting to be noticed by everyone else. So medieval romance carried a nervous brightness. It was exciting partly because it was watched, limited, and uncertain. A smile could warm an entire afternoon, but a whisper could chill it just as quickly. Beneath the sweetness of courtship lay a practical fear. That affection might be misunderstood, exposed, mocked, or punished before it had time to become anything real. That risk did not stop people from flirting, it simply taught them to do it carefully. Secret meetings were part of medieval romance, though they were never as simple as slipping away unnoticed. Privacy was rare. Houses were crowded, streets were watched, servants moved between rooms, and neighbours seemed able to hear footsteps through stone, wood, and moral instinct. If 2 people wanted to speak without a dozen opinions surrounding them, they had to be careful about time, place, and excuse. Hidden corners could be ordinary places with temporary magic. A garden wall after dusk, the edge of an orchard, a churchyard path when others had gone ahead, a doorway half covered by shadow, or the quiet side of a barn during a feast. The meeting might last only a few minutes. A few words, a promise, a question, a shared look, and then one person would return before absence became visible. Medieval secrecy was often less about passion and more about logistics. But secrecy carried danger. A discovered meeting could turn into gossip, family anger, or serious accusations, especially if reputation was already fragile. Even innocent conversation might not remain innocent once retold by someone who enjoyed making stories larger. For this reason, secret courtship often depended on caution, restraint, and a very good sense of when to leave. Staying too long was romantic in poetry, but risky in a village. Still, these hidden moments mattered. They allowed two people to speak more honestly than they could in a market, a churchyard, or a crowded hall. In a world where love usually moved through family, class, custom, and reputation, a quiet meeting could feel like a small room inside the larger world. It was brief, uncertain, and easily broken, but for the people inside it, those few stolen minutes could carry the weight of an entire future. Behind medieval flirting stood the serious matter of marriage. Attraction could begin with a glance, a song, a dance, or a ribbon passed at the right moment. But if the courtship became important, practical questions soon gathered around it. Could the families agree? Was there land, money, a trade, a dowry, a house, a workshop, or a future to build from? Romance might light the path, but marriage asked whether the path could actually be walked. For noble families, marriage could join estates, strengthen alliances, settle disputes, or increase influence. A charming courtship might still be guided by parents, guardians, and advisors who cared more about inheritance than tender feelings. Among townspeople and peasants, the scale was smaller, but the concerns were just as real. A spouse was not only a companion, but a working partner, a household member, and part of the family's economic survival. This did not mean love was absent, it meant love often had to live beside duty. A young couple might genuinely care for one another while still needing permission, property arrangements, church approval, and community acceptance. Even a sweet exchange at a feast could eventually lead to very practical discussions about beds, animals, tools, debts, and who would live under whose roof. So medieval flirting carried a quiet seriousness beneath its playful signs. A glance could be only a glance, but it could also be the beginning of negotiations that involved two families and half the neighbourhood's opinions. The heart might move first, softly and privately, but reality was never far behind, waiting with ledgers, expectations, and a very sensible question: and how exactly will you live? Medieval flirting did not always unfold gracefully. A glance might be misread, a song might reach the wrong window, a gift might be refused, or a message carried by a friend might arrive with the confidence of a royal decree and the accuracy of a tired pigeon. In a world where courtship depended so much on hints, timing, and other people's interpretation, mistakes were almost guaranteed. Sometimes the problem was simple embarrassment. Someone might speak too boldly at a market, dance too eagerly at a feast, linger too long after church, or offer a compliment that sounded better in the mind than it did in the open air. A rejected suitor could become the subject of gentle teasing, while an awkward exchange might follow both people through the village for days. Medieval communities had long memories, especially when those memories were entertaining. There could also be more serious consequences. A jealous rival might spread rumours, families might interfere, or a harmless meeting might be described as something far more scandalous. When reputation mattered so much, even a small misunderstanding could become heavy. A token accepted kindly might be taken as a promise. A friendly conversation might be interpreted as secret courtship. A joke might travel farther than the person who made it. Still, failure was part of the human side of medieval love. Not every song won a heart, not every ribbon was treasured, and not every carefully timed appearance near the well led to romance. Some flirtations faded quietly, others became stories told with laughter later on. And perhaps that is one of the softer truths of the Middle Ages. Even in a world of rules, pressure, and watchful neighbours, people still risked looking foolish for the chance to be loved. Medieval people did not only experience love in daily life, they also imagined it through songs, poems, stories, sermons, romances, and tales told by firelight. In these imagined worlds, love could become grander, brighter, and more dramatic than ordinary courtship. A single glance might wound the heart. A distant lady might inspire years of devotion. A knight might suffer beautifully, write verses, win battles, and remain politely miserable for far longer than most practical families would recommend. Courtly stories often turned desire into something refined and almost ceremonial. Love was described as service, loyalty, longing, patience, and emotional discipline. The lover was expected to be devoted, humble, and transformed by admiration. This made romance sound noble and meaningful, but it also placed it at a careful distance from everyday realities. In a poem, longing could shine. In real life, someone still had to ask permission, arrange property, avoid gossip, and remember whether the pigs had been fed. Ordinary songs and folk stories could be more playful. They spoke of teasing lovers, clever women, foolish suitors, jealous husbands, secret meetings, broken promises, and young people trying to outwit the watchful world around them. These stories were not always gentle, but they show how deeply love and desire lived in medieval imagination. People laughed at romance, feared it, praised it, warned against it, and returned to it again and again. So medieval flirting existed between two worlds. One was practical, full of families, work, money, marriage, reputation, and community rules. The other was imaginative, full of longing, beauty, music, foolish courage, and impossible devotion. Most real people lived somewhere between them. They might not become the hero of a romance, but they still knew the feeling of being noticed, hoping to be understood, and wondering whether one small sign could begin a larger story. In the end, medieval flirting was never only about romance. It was a small window into how people lived, watched, worked, hoped, and feared. A glance across a churchyard, a song beneath a window, a ribbon passed quietly, or a few careful words at a market, all belonged to a world where private feeling had to move through public life. Love was personal, but it was rarely alone. The rules were different from ours. Families had more influence, reputation carried heavier weight, and marriage often stood close to money, land, labour, and survival. Yet beneath all of that, the emotions feel strangely familiar. People still wanted to be noticed. They still worried about rejection. They still tried to look their best, speak at the right moment, and understand whether a smile meant kindness, politeness, or something warmer. That is what makes medieval courtship so human. It could be formal among nobles, practical among peasants, busy and watchful in cities, playful during festivals, and careful almost everywhere. Sometimes it was graceful, sometimes it was awkward, sometimes it was sweet, and sometimes it probably involved someone standing much too long near a well, pretending to have urgent business with a bucket. So, while the clothing, customs, songs, and social rules have changed, the heart of the matter has not disappeared. Medieval people flirted through glances, gifts, songs, work, gossip, dance, patience, and courage. They did it under stricter eyes and with fewer freedoms, but with the same quiet hope that has followed people through every century, that another person might look back, understand, and choose to stay. And so, our look at medieval flirting comes to an end. We have followed glances across village paths, songs beneath windows, gifts passed quietly, dances at feast days, careful compliments, secret meetings, and the watchful world of families and neighbours. Medieval love was shaped by rules, reputation, money, faith, and custom, but beneath all of that, the emotions were deeply familiar. People still hoped to be noticed. They still feared rejection. They still tried to understand whether a smile meant kindness, politeness, or something warmer. Good night.